Good afternoon. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. In a historic decision on Monday, the Supreme Election Board called for a rerun of Istanbul's mayoral election on June 23rd. Following the decision, the mandate of Ekrem İmamoğlu was annulled.
Turkish authorities on Monday scrapped the result of a vote for Istanbul mayor lost by President Tayyip Erdogan's candidate, responding to calls by his AK Party for a rerun in a move that hit the lira and drew opposition accusations of dictatorship. The Supreme Electoral Board ruled that a fresh Istanbul mayoral contest will be held on June 23rd and annulled Ekrem İmamoğlu's mandate. The AKP representative on the board, Recep Özel, said the decision was based on unsigned results documents from March 31st election and on some ballot box officials not being civil servants. However, the YSK left results for district administrators, municipal councils, and local officials unchanged, a decision which the CHP said was nonsense, because all 4 votes were cast in the same envelopes and counted by the same polling officials. Turkey's main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP, which narrowly won the mayor's office in the country's largest city, called the ruling a plain dictatorship. If you're revoking Ekrem İmamoğlu's mandate, then you must also annul President Erdogan's mandate, because the same laws, same regulations, same applications, same polling stations and conditions were present in both elections, CHP Deputy Chairman Muharrem Erkek told reporters. Kati Piri, the European Parliament's Turkey rapporteur, said the decision ends the credibility of democratic transition of power through elections in the country. Meanwhile, the CHP said on Wednesday that it had formally requested the annulment of President Tayyip Erdogan's mandate because the same flaws his party alleged in the city's March 31st mayoral vote occurred in last year's national elections. The CHP also said votes for Istanbul officials and councils submitted in the same envelopes as the mayoral election should be cancelled if the mayoral vote is rerun. The AKP won a majority in the councils.
Main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP, has called the Supreme Election Board's ruling a plain dictatorship.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan argued that rerunning the Istanbul mayoral vote that was won by the opposition will only strengthen democracy, while the opposition condemned the election council's decision, saying that it is neither democratic nor legitimate. Delivering a speech in parliament on Tuesday, Erdogan reiterated that the vote was sullied by irregularities and defended the decision to rerun the March 31st vote, which returned a slim win for the opposition. The winner of the election, Ekrem İmamoğlu, who has been stripped of his duties, called the decision a blow to democracy and vowed to win the re-election. The main opposition, Republican People's Party, CHP leader Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, also strongly condemned the decision and slashed out at the 7 judges of the 11-member electoral board who voted in favor of the cancellation of the polls. Meral Akşener, the leader of the nationalist Good Party, which has backed İmamoğlu, said the will of the people has been trampled on. The verdict to rerun the elections has drawn criticism from outside of Turkey as well. European politicians and EU officials denounced it, and the European Parliament said the decision would end the credibility of democratic elections in Turkey. As to the US State Department's reaction, Ankara took it as particularly offending. The department's spokesperson issued a statement on the rerun, saying that we, like other friends of Turkey, take note of this extraordinary decision. The statement said, a healthy Turkish democracy is in the interest of Turkey and its partners, including the United States, and helps ensure a stable, prosperous, and reliable ally. In response, Turkey's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hami Aksoy called on the United States to respect the decision made by the country's election watchdog.
Today, we're joined by Ünal Çeviköz, who is the Deputy Chairman for International Affairs at the main opposition, CHP, and also a former ambassador. Good afternoon, Mr. Çeviköz.
Good afternoon.
Good to have you here. Welcome. So first of all, how do you evaluate this much contested, much talked about ruling by the Supreme Electoral Board? It was the decision was to hold a rerun for the Istanbul elections and also to annul the mandate of Ekrem İmamoğlu. How do you evaluate it?
Well, I think it's a full demonstration of unlawfulness. It doesn't have any legal justification. It doesn't have any legal background. The decision is extremely political. And I think there is substantial ground to believe that it is political because Recep Tayyip Erdogan, just 3 days before the decision was announced, made it clear that he is willing to see a rerun of the elections, and he put political pressure on the members of the Supreme Election Board. And that's the reason why we simply believe that it is unlawful, and it does not have any substantial ground, because that kind of a decision by law requires concrete evidence, substantial evidence. And I don't think that there is any concrete evidence or substantial evidence. It is based on presumptions. It is based on presumptions in the fact that the High Election Board committees were not assigned properly according to the law. And in those ballot box stations, the result of the votes may change the result of the metropolitan mayor's vote. This is just a presumption, and I don't think that law requires presumption. It doesn't have any logic. That's the reason why we find it extremely unlawful.
Mm-hmm. So you've just called this decision unlawful, and you've also mentioned that it's based on no substantial ground. However, your party still, the decision of your party is to participate in these elections. So if your party doesn't endorse this ruling by the Supreme Board of Elections, why do you participate in it?
Because we believe in democracy, we believe in rule of law, and the Republican People's Party is the founder of the Republic of Turkey. And we believe in all the fundamental principles of the Republic of Turkey, which are, of course, rule of law, democracy. And that's the reason why we simply want to defend all these principles and fundamental background of the Republic of Turkey. We have to show to the public that in this country, in spite of the unlawfulness, because we see that in every instance and in every sphere, in spite of these unlawfulness, there is still hope for a rule of law, and there is still hope for the future where this country will be returning back to normal and to the democratic principles. That is what we want to prove.
And what happens if the CHP doesn't win on June 23rd?
That is not an option. We never considered this as an option. We believe that the mayor of Istanbul has already been elected, and he is going to rerun. And in the new elections on the 23rd, I think the competition will be between the mayor of Istanbul and the runner-up. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason why we simply believe that the mayor, who has already been elected and who has been legitimately confirmed and who has received his election certificate, is now going to prove to the people of Istanbul that it is his right, and his legitimate right is confiscated. I think the people of Istanbul is going to believe in that and support Ekrem İmamoğlu extensively.
And do you think this decision will have an impact on those voters who had voted for Binali Yıldırım in the previous vote? Do you think it will have a significant impact?
It could have a significant impact because people are fed up with all these repetitive elections in the country. I think people simply observe that there is a pattern now. Whenever an election is not won by AKP or by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, there's always a political pressure and there's always a push to renew the elections. Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself, he said that we did it in 2015, 7th of June and 1st of November, so why not we can do it again? This was before the decision of the Supreme Election Board. So he puts all the political pressure on the members of the Supreme Election Board, and he gives the hint that if an election is not won by AKP, then it should rerun. I think this pattern is now being so obvious, and that is exactly Recep Tayyip Erdogan's word. He said it happened in 2015, so we can do it again in 2019. I think this is really an insult to the intellect, and it's an insult to the legitimate right of vote and right of election of the people of Istanbul.
Finally, Mr. Çeviköz, what does this decision mean for Turkey's future, in your opinion? Are we at a crossroads, perhaps?
Well, we are, of course, in a crossroads for several years now. Unfortunately, Turkey is divided and polarized extremely between those forces who believe in democracy and those forces who actually refuse democracy. Turkey is unfortunately shifting towards authoritarianism. This is a very important crossroads, And it also harms the image and the perception of Turkey in the outer world and in the international politics. This is dangerous. I feel so sorry about all these decisions, particularly because when we are going to have a rerun in the Istanbul Metropolitan Mayor's election, people are asking themselves, why are we going to renew only this election? Because in the same envelope, people cast their votes for the election of district mayors. They have cast their votes for the members of the city council or the municipal council, but those votes are not cancelled. Those are accepted to be valid because AKP won a majority in all those votes, and only the metropolitan mayoralties is contested. I think people feel that this is not right, and this is extremely against the rule of law, and that is, of course, depreciating the image of Turkey. Turkey is losing its legitimacy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Çeviköz. We'll be back with you again in the studio shortly to talk a bit about foreign policy this time. And meanwhile, we'll watch our next news video. In a written statement on Sunday, the United States has urged Turkey to reconsider its decision to start offshore drilling operations in Cyprus.
The United States is deeply concerned by Turkey's announced intentions to begin offshore drilling operations in an area claimed by the Republic of Cyprus as its exclusive economic zone, the U.S. Department of State spokesperson Morgan Ortagus said in a statement on Sunday. This step is highly provocative and risks raising tensions in the region. We urge Turkish authorities to halt these operations and encourage all parties to act with restraint, Ortagus said. The Turkish Foreign Ministry, in response, said that the U.S. statement is detached from the facts. Our drilling and seismic vessels exploration activities will continue in the licensed areas in our continental shelf, which our government has provided to TP in 2009 and 2012, the ministry said in a statement on Monday. Likewise, Turkey will continue to protect the continental shelf rights of Turkish Cypriots as long as the Greek Cypriot does not include its equal partner of the island, Turkish Cypriots, in the decision-making process for hydrocarbon resources or unless it ends unilateral hydrocarbon activities, added the ministry. Cyprus has been divided since 1974, when a Greek Cypriot coup was followed by violence against the island's Turks and Ankara's intervention as guarantor power. It has seen an on and off peace process in recent years, including the collapse of a 2017 initiative in Switzerland under the auspice of guarantor countries Turkey, Greece, and the UK. Turkey has consistently contested the Greek Cypriot administration's unilateral drilling in the East Mediterranean, saying Turkish Cypriots also have rights to the resources in the area.
Welcome once again, Mr. Çeviköz. So, are we witnessing a new fault line in U.S.-Turkey relations, in your opinion, following this escalating tension in the Eastern Mediterranean over Turkey's decision to drill for natural gas?
I think the fault line already exists in the Turkish-US relations, and there are so many files which are actually creating this tension between the two countries. This is, of course, starting with the Syria problem. The two countries are of different opinion as far as the resolution of the Syrian conflict is concerned. The assistance that the United States has provided to PYD-YPG is also contested and refused by Turkey. There is also the Turkish-American relations are also having another tension because of Turkey's procurement of S-400s from Russia. And the United States made it very clear that this will drop Turkey off the F-35 project. And now there's a new issue, which is about the Eastern Mediterranean. Eastern Mediterranean is very critical. And I think if we did not have a deteriorating Turkish-US relations, probably that kind of a statement wouldn't come from the United States. The statement came from the United States because the priority and the importance which has been attributed to Turkey in the Eastern Mediterranean, unfortunately, has lost its value in the eyes of the US administration. Otherwise, the United States has always been very careful in looking at the Eastern Mediterranean and keeping a balance between Turkey and Greece, between the Greek Cypriots and the Turkish Cypriots, and they have always approached to it from a very objective and a balanced manner. This balanced approach is now lost. The reason for that is because of the situation or the current state of affairs between Turkey and the United States. That's the reason why we are witnessing some kind of a high-profile démarche, let's say, coming from the United States. This is not good because Turkey certainly has the right to start drilling in its own continental shelf. In the Eastern Mediterranean, the boundaries or the territorial waters or the economic zone, all kinds of delimitations and demarcations are still pending. They have not been finalized. And that's the reason why Turkey, since Turkey has not accepted the law of the sea, Turkey simply tries to defend its rights in the continental shelf. What is being done is the wrong step forward by the Greek Cypriot administration, because they are not taking into consideration the legitimate rights of the Turkish Cypriots. And that is the main problem why we are facing that kind of a tension there.
You're a diplomat by profession, and you've served as an ambassador for long years. So from the perspective of a diplomat, how do you evaluate the Turkish Foreign Ministry's response to the US?
I think the Turkish-US relations need to be approached in a very delicate manner, very transparent and very frank manner. First of all, it doesn't necessarily mean only between Turkey and the United States. In international relations, state-to-state relations should not start or continue or pursue at the top level, at the highest level. Unfortunately, this is a new trend in Turkish foreign policy. The foreign ministry is being sidelined. In the foreign policy making and in the foreign policy implementation, the top echelon of the state administration is having the priority and having the real prerogative. And I don't think that this is helping for Turkey's image and Turkey's international relations. Because if you give the importance to all the other organizations and institutions, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, such as other institutions, to deal with bilateral problems at the lower level, and if you cannot resolve the problems, then you can perhaps raise the level to the upper echelons. That would certainly be a very practical approach. But I think just because of the personalities of the two leaders, this is not being pursued, and simply people believe that they can resolve problems by talking on the phone. This is not happening, and I don't think that it is the right way to proceed.
Mm-hmm. And what do you foresee for the future of Turkey-US relations from this point onwards?
Well, at least we should be happy that we are still maintaining dialogue. Dialogue is, of course, very important. If dialogue is interrupted, then this is the worst case scenario. But let us hope that this dialogue will bring both of the countries to a logical position, and they will find a solution to the existing problems. But it is true that this dialogue is unfortunately between deaf ears, and people are not communicating as it is needed and as it should be to each other. Only we are hearing some analyses or some statements through the press. This is not also helping. But I think the more than 60 years of allied relationship between Turkey and in the United States requires the continuation of these relations. Turkish-US relations had its ups and downs in its history. This is probably one of those moments that we are passing through, but I'm afraid this is the worst that we had in the past.
Thank you very much, Mr. Çeviköz, for being with us today in the studio and for your comments. Today we were joined by Ünal Çeviköz, the Deputy Chairman of the main opposition CHP, and he commented on the Supreme Electoral Board's decision to rerun the Istanbul mayoral elections and also on the crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean. And now we'll continue with our next news video. The Turkish lira hit a new low this week as it traded at 6.225 to the dollar yesterday. The central bank suspended its one-week repo auctions in a bid to defend the Turkish lira.
Turkey's central bank has suspended its one-week repo auctions in a bid to defend the Turkish lira. At the latest Monetary Policy Committee meeting held on April 25th, the bank decided to keep the one-week repo auction rate constant at 24%. Considering the developments in financial markets, it has been decided to suspend the one-week repo auctions for a period of time, the central bank said in a statement published on its website on Wednesday. The central bank did not say when it might resume the auctions. The bank had previously taken a similar action to suspend the auctions on March 22nd, which were resumed on April 8th. Turkey's currency weakened beyond 6.24 against the dollar yesterday, sliding nearly 1% from its close of 6.17. The lira hit its weakest level in 8 months since September 24, amid concerns over the rerun of Istanbul mayoral elections and tensions ahead of US-China trade talks. Meanwhile, the central bank reported yesterday that its gross foreign exchange reserves eased to $72.6 billion as of May 3rd from $73.3 billion on April 26th.
Former President Abdullah Gül and former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu voiced criticism over the Electoral Board's decision to hold a rerun of the Istanbul elections.
Critics of the decision included former President Abdullah Gül and former Prime Minister Ahmet Davutoğlu, giving way to speculations that sidelined AKP politicians are preparing to launch a breakaway party. Ahmet Davutoğlu, a former AKP Prime Minister, appeared to share the opposition's concerns about the validity of the Supreme Election Board's decision to annul the Istanbul election. In a series of tweets published on Tuesday evening, Davutoğlu said events after the Istanbul election and the decision to annul it had harmed the basic values of Turkey's democracy, that voters had the final word at the ballot box. The biggest loss for a political movement is not an election, but the loss of moral superiority and social conscience, said the former prime minister, who signaled a possible split from the ruling party after the election in a Facebook manifesto criticizing its current direction and nationalist turn. Former president and fellow AKP member Abdullah Gül also denounced the board's decision via Twitter on Tuesday. Gül compared the decision to a decision taken by the Constitutional Court, Turkey's highest legal body, in 2007, when he was out forward as a candidate for the presidency. At the time, presidential candidates were voted in by parliament, and in a decision many viewed as designed to block Gül, whose Islamist background was viewed with suspicion by many judges at the time, the court ruled that at least 367 deputies must take part in a vote for it to be valid. Meanwhile, renowned conservative journalist and Daily Karar columnist Mustafa Karayalioğlu also criticized the Electoral Board's decision, calling it inexplicable. The reality is that this annulment decision is one of the most sensational, disputed, and wrongful decisions in the history of Turkish democracy. It is a big political mistake, Karayalioğlu wrote in his column.
Professor Ersin Kalaycıoğlu from Sabancı University gave an exclusive interview on Turkish democracy to Medyascope this week. Briefly, is Turkey a democracy in the technical sense of the term? What does political science tell us?
Well, most of these measures that I've referred to Turkey as a hybrid regime. It's somewhere between a democracy and an authoritarian system. It is a hybrid regime simply because, as we have seen in these local elections, the government did lose and can lose elections. In authoritarian systems, governments do not lose elections. So that makes Turkey somewhat less than an authoritarian system. But the elections, the quality of elections also leave much to aspire to become democratic elections. We have various civil liberty issues, we have various freedom of expression issues, we have various sort of level playing field of campaign practices, related issues, and we have therefore been more or less debating and discussing whether the elections are democratic elections, whether they are free and fair, whether their freeness and fairness have been in debate. So there are a large number of issues that we're debating, but so far, since governments can lose elections, it gives a good indication that in essence, Turkey is caught between democracy, especially liberal democracy, where representative institutions matter. They don't. Our representative institutions, especially the Grand National Assembly, has suffered a lot of erosion, and therefore it's not very effective. It functions more like a talking shop right now, than a sort of checking and balancing institution, the kind that the US Congress plays in the US system, for example. So there's no resemblance that we have to that kind of performance under these circumstances. So we seem to have veered away from democratization, but at the same time, we have not fully arrived at an authoritarian system. We seem to be caught somewhere in between. Therefore, it's a hybrid regime.
Jailed PKK leader Abdullah Öcalan met his lawyers for the first time in more than 7 years this week after a hunger strike began to protest his isolation.
A letter seen signed by Öcalan was read out by his lawyers at a press conference in Istanbul on Monday. Öcalan wrote that although he respects the resistance of friends inside and outside prison, he asked them not to carry hunger strikes to the point where they will endanger their health and lead themselves to death. The hunger strike campaign was started in November 2018 by People's Democratic Party (HDP) lawmaker Leyla Güven, calling for the resumption of negotiation talks which were terminated by the Turkish government in 2015. Öcalan said, "There is a need for a deep social reconciliation in this historic process we are experiencing. There is an urgent need for a method of democratic negotiations far removed from any and all polarization and culture of conflict for the solution of problems." Öcalan said that this path was consistent with the so-called Nevruz Declaration of 2013, in which he announced a historic ceasefire in an attempt to bring an end to the armed conflict between the PKK and the Turkish state. The press conference was held after lawyers met with Öcalan for the first time since July 2011 in the İmralı Island prison where he's been held since 1999. Öcalan was sentenced to death for treason after his capture by Turkish agents in Kenya in 1999. The ruling was commuted to life imprisonment when Turkey abolished capital punishment in 2002.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 5 p.m. Goodbye.